Welcome back. It's been a few weeks.
Yeah, it's great to be back. Great to be back with you. I've been traveling down in the States for a couple of weeks, and you've been traveling as well. And we are both in the midst of a busy primary nomination election season, provincial election season in both the States and Canada. So it's been really fun.
Yeah. Multiple multiple campaigns that we're working on with candidates and sometimes not candidates, depending on people's budgets and things like that. So it's definitely a busy season for us and gives us a lot of insight, I think, into what I think will help people who are part of the campaign university. And just for those of you who forget who we are, I'm George Affleck and this is Mike Wilson, and we are the campaign university team here. We created this for candidates and people who are interested in running for office and are passionate about politics and want to do it for the right reasons. We don't care where you are on the political spectrum. This is about finding and helping great people run for office, keep our democracy working well. And we're proud to be working with over 1,000 people in the campaign university now. Really excited about that. And if you're not a member of our training courses that are available, you can sign up for those. They're only $8 a month, and you have full access to all our training. If you haven't had a chance to do that, we kind of touch on a lot of that training in these live videos. But if you want to organize structure of the training and to follow it in an easy step by step, then please sign up for our $8 a month program. For today, though, Mike, we're going to be focusing on the difference between primaries and the actual election campaigns. I think there's a big difference between the two because it really is about a direct audience sometimes and a broader audience. So, Mike, you're going to take us through the differences between those two things and what people should be thinking about, because depending on where you are, either you're in that period of time where you're trying to become a candidate or you are a candidate and the election's coming. I was listening to this podcast this morning in the UK called The News Agents, and they went through all the elections that are happening around the world over the next 3 months. It's crazy how
Yeah.
many elections are happening.
I think there's 200 nations roughly in the world, and 65 or around that have their election this fall. So it's, it's totally wild. Not to
Crazy.
mention the provinces and municipalities and states and districts that are also having their elections. So totally wild. Once again, like the heart behind Campaign University is getting good people, no matter where you are in the spectrum, into politics. And, we see all the division going on wherever in the world we are working on campaigns. And we're really missing those great candidates that bring something new and fresh and ideas to the table, not just after power and partisanship. So that's really what we're aiming for here. And as we work with people, this is that time of year when you're moving from a primary into a general election. And often you need a different team, you need different tactics, and it's something really to be aware of. I find there's people that are really good at campaigning, general campaigning, and people that are really good at primaries. But often those teams are very different and the strategies are very different. So we're going to dive into a bit of that for you today, looking at some key differences. All right. So we have always looked at this Nevada 6th district. Since we last met with you, the primary actually went forward and Jill Douglas won the primary quite handily over Joshua Stacey. So she will be now running in the general election this fall to be the state senator in this district, the swing district that the current Democrat incumbent just won by a few thousand votes. So it's a very, very tight race. And
Mhm.
Jill Douglas has a great chance of winning. But she's in that period that we're talking about right now. So to win this primary, Jill, really focused. She's been in other levels of government politics before, so she had key constituencies, a lot of personal touch, a lot of personal outreach to bring these members. And George, you ran before in smaller races. And if you have just a race of 7,000 voters, it's amazing how many of those voters you can actually touch personally, right?
Oh, 100%. And obviously with technology now, and that's something we offer as well to help people, you can constantly communicate with them either through Zoom like this or in real person things. So there's no excuse for not reaching out in a real personal way to that number of constituents because they want to hear from you. It's always interesting in politics. One of the toughest things in politics is trying to remember everybody's face. There's these great scenes in Veep where she's walking around and she's got an assistant who's always saying, "This is this person, and you know them through this, and blah, blah, blah." I wish I had that kind of person, but it's really important to know the thousands of people that are your biggest fans and supporters because they are your team when you get into the big election that will be your biggest champions.
Yeah. So you want that personal touch, right? In the primary, you're doing phone calls, you're going to doors, you're doing events where you actually shake hands with everyone and meet them. And as you say, George, try and remember their name. And you work the phones and you do whatever you can to hand touch as many of those primary voters as you can. But once you switch to a general election, that just becomes impossible. Like if you're in a state senate district, you're talking about 100,000 voters. Obviously, you're not going to make your way through all of them. In the city where you won, George, there's, I think, 450,000 eligible voters.
Mhm.
So you were not gonna door knock all those doors. So
No.
you have to pivot a strategy into what I like to call maybe a more of a persuasion strategy or an air war strategy, where you're really getting into talking to big groups of people over big media, over large time periods as well.
The terminology, by the way, air war is basically advertising, and buying the audience as opposed to knocking on doors, doing events. Now it's all the other things that come with marketing, really. And so that's why we call it an air war.
Yeah, so it's a big shift. I think a lot of times you're in those primary races where it matters so much. Did you meet that key business person or that key influencer or that one group of people in the party that was bringing 100 people to vote for you? But once you get into the general election, you really need to shift to, is my message getting across? Is it clear? Is it concise? Is it getting to lots of people? So that's a big change. And it takes a different skill set. You need less networking and you need more communications prowess and discipline. So it's a
Yeah,
big.
because Jill killed it there, 72%. She won by, but that doesn't mean she's going to kill it when it comes to a general election. That's a dominant, that's a powerful win there, but it doesn't necessarily translate into a successful general election.
And that's a good segue, George, because issues using issues, how you use issues really differs between a primary and a nomination and in a campaign. And often, like, for instance, Jill might have won that 72% on an issue that brought that all those Republican voters, but that issue would kill her in the general election. So you need to be really, really smart. Here we have the issues in Nevada at this time. So jobs and the economy are really big. In the district itself, they have a lot of crime problems as well. Both of the candidates talked about that during their campaign, but Jill obviously did a better job of that. Joshua tried to be a bit more niche. He's a tech executive talking about tech and other things. Jill stuck to the big issues and brought people in. Crime, even though it wasn't a big issue like statewide, what it did is bring angry people into the primary to vote. So you can find those groups. So in the primary, you want to use issues that are going to get a galvanized group of people that really, really care about an issue so much that they're going to come out and vote for you and join the party. But make sure that's an issue that's not going to cost you the general election, where, the general populace in that state or district is not going to vote for you. Often people make mistakes, George, where they're like, oh, I can get these votes from these kind of fringe people over here in the primary. And then they tie their horse to them. And then sure enough, that costs them the general election because people are like, hey, you sold your soul to this group of people and I will never win.
So many states and certainly in Canada, the same thing. The win lose is the middle. It's really that, and certainly in the states. When you look at the latest numbers for president, it's basically 49-49 right now. 49%, 49%. So, but there's this 1% that are 2% of people that are going to swing one way or the other. That is crazy. And so being extreme is not going to necessarily get those centrists over to your side. So when you go into the general election, and if you're in an area where there's that tight race happening, you got to figure out, how do I win over that middle, that mushy middle, the centrists?
And that's really a big difference in how you use issues and talk about issues when you're moving from the primary to the general election. So you really want to do that calculus in your primary, in your nomination. Hey, how am I wording these things in a way that can actually get those core base voters to want to believe in me and want to vote for me, but also is not going to alienate all those middle of the road voters that you're going to need in the general election. So how you frame things, how you use policies is super important in the primary because it could cost you the general election.
There's always the risk, of course, that your overall party, whether you're Republicans or Democrats, might be extreme, which might make it challenging for you to find that middle. But generally, on a local level, when you're running locally, the issues matter. That's happening locally, and how do those resonate to everyone?
And don't feel you need to, in a primary or in a general election, give a hard firm position on every single issue, especially
Yeah.
those ones where you're trying to get trapped. It's more than perfectly fine to say that this is something you want to talk to the incumbents in your district about. Make sure you understand where everyone's coming from, learn more about, really understand. People will respect that. A lot of people get trapped by these fringe groups or even, non-fringe groups that are saying, "Hey, I need your answer on this," where you may not have an answer that you've fully thought out, and you do want to talk to people more and really understand every side of the issue,
Yeah.
which is a perfectly legit thing to do as a politician.
The other thing is, and we've talked a lot about this and choosing your 1 or 2 or 3 main areas of expertise, and then positioning every issue around using those as a way to get to your issues. Some people might say you're deflecting, but it works. You simply, if you're not a jobs and economy expert, and that's the number one issue that everyone wants to talk about, what is your personal expertise that can resonate with that? And it's interesting because going back to the earlier slide about the other candidate and how she won against the other guy, and you said he had a tech expertise. I don't know if enough about what he did, but maybe he didn't do what we would have told him to do, which he really relied on his tech expertise without being able to make that make sense on the other issues that were important within that campaign. And I think that's where you lose. Okay, great, you're a tech guy, but I need to know what else you can deliver and what else you can do. And are you listening to me about the main issues that we care about right now? And where do you stand on those? If you can't communicate that in a way that people will trust you and feel like, okay, this person's going to be able to do this. In marketing, we call know, like, and trust, which is something really important for products and services. It's no different in running for office. People want to know you, they want to like you, and they want to trust you. And those three things are key to success. It really comes down to making sure that's what you focus on without putting yourself in a place where you feel uncomfortable answering questions that you simply can't answer.
Yeah, it's a great point, George. And some people, they just try and go too far. Or like in the case of Josh, I think just not far enough in trying to understand some of the broader issues.
Yeah.
Uh, So also looking at demographics, there's a huge broadening of your demographics. So here we have the demographics of this state Senate district. In the primary, you're really micro targeting groups. So you might get people that really care about immigration and really care about crime. And those are really organized and energetic groups of people, and you can get them out to vote. So you go meet with them and certain neighborhoods and certain income brackets in your district are going to be all about those issues, and you galvanize those groups, get them out to the primary, get them to vote. When you get into an election, you're going to have to go a little higher level with the thinking. And we've talked about this a little bit more, but building a persona. So as you're saying, George, that middle of the road person. So if we're saying, we want to get a mother, around a middle class mother in this area of the district with, 2 kids and really worried about education and healthcare and the economy, meeting her bills at home. And then you come up with your messaging to that person, and you need to have relentless discipline because in the primary, you're going to these little groups of people and your messaging is a little bit different depending on who they are and what they want, as they want to talk about more specific things. But once you're in that general election, the voters are not seeing you as often, or they don't understand the issues as much as those primary voters. So you're going to want to be way more broad, way more bold, and way more disciplined in your messaging and how you talk. And I think this is where a lot of people make the mistake when they get to the general election, not being able to kind of elevate themselves to an inspirational or a goal
Yeah.
setting persona out of that kind of tic tac politics that are going on in a primary.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that you have an incumbent who's running, so they've got the benefit of being the incumbent, which is always tough, especially if they're going into their second term. That's always tough to beat a second term. Usually people will give people one more chance. So your job, if you're the opposition and you're taking on the incumbent, your main point is change. You want to change what the people have been doing. So everything you talk about has to be what they've been doing is not working. We got to change what they've been doing, and this is how I'm going to do it. And that helps you focus on how you position yourself on the issues, and then you focus on those 2 or 3 main core issues that the whole electorate cares about, whether it's crime, whether it's healthcare, whatever it might be. You're the candidate for change if you're up against an incumbent. If you're the incumbent, your job is stay the course, or you can't go to the other way because it's going to wreck everything. It's a different kind of campaign. So depending on you, it's much easier to be an incumbent. Stay the course is an easier message. And of course, you can think back to Barack Obama, his first campaign. The literal campaign was their slogan was change. It's the most obvious campaign slogan on the history of politics, but it worked. And so when you're running for office and it's the general election and you're up against the incumbent, what are you going to do to change things? How are you going to do that?
That's a great point. And actually, in this race, Joshua, he didn't get it out in his broad messaging, but he was talking a lot about how the Democrat, on the door is, everyone was saying, "Oh, we've never seen her. She's never put on an event. She's never done anything." The incumbent. So there was this anger there, which is actually a great general election
Mhm.
message, but he was using it in the primary, where everyone in the primary obviously agrees with that.
Yeah.
So he might have misstepped by starting with a general election
Yeah.
rather than a primary tactic, which would have been something more like grabbing the business community and making sure they come out and vote for him.
That's right. Josh
Uh,
should have signed up for the campaign university, Mike.
should Final thing before we end here, just the differences between your target numbers and the money you're going to need. So this is actually Jill's fundraising. Joshua did not fundraise anything. So Jill raised an incredible amount of money. She raised almost
I,
150K and
I
only,
think we found. I think we found a reason why Josh might have lost.
yeah, yeah. Money matters. Money matters. But
Yeah.
point here, money matters even more in a general election
Yeah.
than a primary, but it matters all the time. You can see Jill raised 150, spent 50. She actually put in 100 grand of her own money.
Oh,
She raised another 50 and spent 50. So that pivot over to her general election, but money matters. But you're using that money in the primary to reach out and touch each person. So you want to put that money into phone calling or getting to the door or holding events. Whereas in the election, that money becomes all about reaching as many people as you can in the air war, which we talk about, and having a massive get out the vote ground game, which takes a ton of resources to do.
yeah. Air war is pretty straightforward. You know the numbers. You know how much it costs to reach a certain number of people. We have a whole training on advertising, and we've talked about it here in the lives. A ground war, it's about volunteers. It's about software. It's about a whole bunch of things, and it's way more complicated than an air war and can be a lot more expensive potentially. So I wish I could say it's 50-50, but it depends on where you're running, what might work better. When you look at that amount of money she raised, which isn't a ton actually, surprisingly, for a campaign for a primary, I think we've seen bigger numbers out there in other areas. What would you think her budget will be for the general election for that?
Oh, I think she'd definitely be in the $1 million range, even for that
Easy.
Senate district.
Easy. 2 to
Yeah.
3, I bet. And because you think about, social media advertising alone is in that market, probably easily $500,000 a day, easily, if not more. I
Yeah.
mean, just this in a small market. Fundraising, we've talked about that. We have a whole training portal on that and section on that. Such a huge part of it. I won my first election because I think partly because my last name's Affleck, and so I was on top of the ballot. But people always say that was the only reason, and I go, no, 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 no. I had a lot of social media followers because of my background in marketing, but I also raised the most money by like 3 or 4 times what my other candidates ran across the board. I prioritize fundraising, number one thing for me as a candidate. Uh, that luckily at that time the party didn't request I give back to them in the general campaign. So I had the most money for the general campaign, and the nomination was a bit of a different process. But I think I spend the most money on advertising.
Yeah.
That's
Money
that
matters.
world.
Money matters. It's just the thing you got to do and you got to work at. And, if you have a good primary, you can pivot those voters into donors and start working it to take that general campaign. So yeah, that's basically some of the key differences. Many of you are pivoting out of your primary now to a general election, and often you need to make a team change as well. I think we didn't touch on this in the document we just looked at, but you might have a real good party insider that gets you through the primary, but you want a really great strategic communications mind, ground game mind that's going to learn how to position yourself to win the general election.
In a general election, you got to pay for your campaign manager, you got to pay for your volunteer coordinator, you got to pay for that's where a lot of your budget goes to, and those people focus mostly on the ground game. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting few months though. We're
Yeah,
looking
very
forward to
interesting.
doing.
Very exciting season all around the world. We're seeing crazy elections going on. And yeah, we'll be returning more consistently with some training going back to through all the fundamentals. So really excited to offer that to you guys and all the candidates we're working with in their races right now. So thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.
Thanks everybody.